This is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and in this video I'd like to provide students with some help making their beginning in Lesson 7 in the Academy's Latin Grammar 1 course. As you can see on the screen here, in this lesson we're going to study syllables and we're going to study articles 10 and 11. Compared to some of our recent lessons, this is going to be a relatively easy lesson, so let's go ahead and get started. As I said, the topic of Lesson 7 is syllables. You can see that topic title here as we prepare to study Article 10. The first question we have to ask is, what is a syllable? What is a syllable? And here we have the answer as the main point of Article 10. The syllable is a unit of pronunciation. The syllable is a unit of pronunciation. In other words, we speak in syllables. We speak one syllable at a time. This is why when young children begin reading, it's good for them to learn to read one syllable at a time. When we come to the study of a classical language, it's important for us to understand how to identify syllables, not only because they help us to pronounce words clearly, but they also help us to identify things like breathings and accent marks and other important points of grammar that we need to pay attention to. We'll see this both in Latin studies and also in Greek, if you join me for Greek studies. The syllable is the unit of pronunciation. We speak one syllable at a time. Words, the words that we speak, they're made up of syllables. Now, when we get into the parts of a syllable, how a syllable is actually made, we read here that a syllable consists of a vowel. And the reason why our lesson says that is because we can have a syllable that is simply a vowel. We have an example right here. In the Latin verb amo, we see the first syllable is simply one vowel. So a syllable can be a single vowel, or it can be a vowel joined with one or more consonants. So a syllable can be as simple as a vowel, or a vowel joined with one or more consonants. So here we see both examples. In the word amo, we have the first syllable is just a single vowel, but here in the second syllable, we see a vowel, o, joined with a consonant, m. In this second example down here, we see the first syllable is a vowel, e, joined with the consonant l. And we see in the second syllable the vowel a joined with the consonant x. So we can understand what it means when we read a syllable consists of a vowel or a vowel and one or more consonants. Now it's important for us to note one thing. When we say a syllable consists of a vowel or a vowel and one or more consonants, we have to remember that a diphthong can be considered a single vowel sound. So when we say a syllable consists of a vowel, it's possible for a syllable to consist of two vowels when they're joined together to make a diphthong. So remember that. Remember that a diphthong, when we're talking about syllables, can be treated as a single long vowel sound. All right, let's keep going here. Pretty simple so far. How many syllables does a word have? If we want to count the number of syllables in a word has as many syllables as it contains separate vowels and diphthongs. A word has as many syllables as it contains separate vowels and diphthongs. So let's look back at these two examples here. If we look at the word amo, we see that the word amo has two vowels. Therefore, it has two syllables. The word lixa has two separate vowels, therefore it has two syllables. Up here we can see some more Latin words. Let's just look at a couple examples. We see this word here, stimulus, stimulus, and we see 1, 2, 3 separate vowels, so stimulus has 3 syllables. Here we have the word gnatus, gnatus. We see 1, 2 separate vowels, so that word has 2 syllables. Let's try to find a more complicated word here. Here we have kurulis, kurulis. We see 1, 2, 3 separate vowels. That word will have 3 syllables. So a very simple rule. A word has as many syllables as it contains separate vowels and diphthongs. Now you can see, when we learn a rule like this, you can see why you must be able to identify the diphthongs and know the combinations of vowels that make diphthongs. Because when you look at a word, you have to be able to look at that word, see the vowels in that word, and know that 2 of them form a diphthong. And the only way you can know that is by memorizing the diphthongs. So when it comes to separating words into syllables, which is important, as we're going to see, you've got to be able to identify diphthongs, because if 2 vowels are together and they're not a diphthong, they make 2 separate syllables. But if 2 vowels are together and they do make a diphthong, it's just 1 syllable. So in order to pronounce Latin words correctly, you have to be able to identify diphthongs. So if you're still a little shaky on identifying diphthongs, take some time and review the lesson on diphthongs and make sure you've got them mastered. I'll always point them out in our lessons, but it's good for you to make sure you can identify them when you see them. All right, so let's keep going here. Sometimes we may need to divide a word into syllables. For example, figuring out how to pronounce a word we've never seen before. It's helpful to break the word into syllables and pronounce 1 syllable at a time. But we have to actually know how to break a word into syllables. It's not always as simple as you might think. In dividing a word into syllables, a consonant between 2 vowels joins or belongs to the second vowel. So when we have a word like amo, we have 2 vowels, but we've got this consonant in between. The consonant always goes to the second syllable. So amo would not be am-o, because the consonant will go with the second syllable. It will be a-mo. Not am-o, but a-mo. Here we have the word lixa. You have L-E-X-A. That consonant X, which is between the E and the A, goes with the A in the second syllable. We don't say lix-a. We say li-xa. 2 syllables with the consonant going with the second vowel to begin the second syllable. So that's the meaning of this rule here. In dividing a word into syllables, a consonant between 2 vowels belongs to the second syllable. Okay? We can take a look at some examples here if we look back up here. So if we have this word stimulus, stimulus, we see that there's an M between the E and the U. There's an L between these 2 U's. So we would say sti, put the consonant with the second vowel and say mu, and again put the consonant with the next vowel and say loose. So the 3 syllables are sti, mu, loose. Here's another one. We have la, Then we have the letter te in between the a and the u. So that te is going to go with the second vowel. So we're going to divide this word into two syllables between the a and the te and read la tus, not lat us. That's not right. La tus. That consonant between the two vowels goes with the second vowel. It begins the next syllable. All right, so that's what's taught here at the bottom of this page. Let's keep moving. Now, we've got to learn about a little more complicated situation. A little more complicated situation when there are two consonants together. How do we divide a syllable when there are two consonants together? And let's just look at a couple examples real quick. See if I can find one. Here's an example. We have pastor. So we don't have one consonant between two vowels. We actually have two consonants between two vowels. So the question is, do we divide them down the middle and say pas-tor, or do we keep them together and say pa-store? So we've got to learn how to divide a word when there are two consonants together in that word. And this is very common. We'll see lots of examples. And hopefully we will also avoid seeing some bad examples where they've got them divided wrongly. So we'll take a look at that later. But in the next rule we read, any combination of consonants that can begin a word, any combination of consonants, and it's not just two, it could be more than two, could be three, could even be four. Any combination of consonants that can begin a word belongs to the following vowel. So any combination of consonants that can begin a word gets treated as a single consonant sound and moves with the second vowel to start the next syllable. Let me read that one more time. Any combination of consonants that can begin a word belongs to the following vowel. Now we just saw an example of this in this word stimulus. We see at the beginning of the word, we have two consonants together at the beginning of the word, S and T, sti. So we can see that this is an example of a combination of consonants that can begin a word. I don't think I see any others right here. Here's an example. Down here in this last word, krevi, we see ke and er at the beginning of this word. So this is another example of a pair of consonants that can begin a word. And let me just scroll up and look around a little bit for another example. Bear with me a second here. See if I can find something. No, I'm not going to find it there. Here's a good example here. The verb scripsi. We can see three consonants together before the vowel, three consonants. So all three of those are treated as a single blend or a single consonant sound because that's a combination of consonants that can begin a word. Here's another example. P-er. In princeps, those two consonants can begin a word and therefore they'll be treated as a single consonant sound. Let's keep looking around for some examples. See if we can find another one. Bear with me as I scroll a little bit. Here we see another example of princeps. We see those two consonants together at the beginning of a word. Here we see another. We see dracuma. We see the de and er at the beginning of the word together. So that's another example. Here we see ge and er at the beginning of a word in grakilis. So that's another example for us. Let's see. One more example and we'll get back to our next rule. Let's find one more example if we can. Here's another example of ge er in the word gracchus. Gra would be a syllable. those two consonants would stay together. And I think we'll, oh, here's one more. Ge-el, ge-el. We have two consonants together that can start a word. So we've seen a bunch of examples in these first few articles, and you'll see them all through your readings. So let's get back to our lesson here, down to the next part of Article 10. So any combination of consonants that can begin a word belongs to the following vowel. And we've got some examples here. So for example, we have the word asper, which means rough in Latin, asper. Now you see there's a vowel a and another vowel e, and there's two consonants in between those two vowels. But because these two consonants are an example of two consonants that can begin a word, they both stay together and begin the second syllable. So we don't divide them in the middle. We keep them together and they begin the second syllable because they're two consonant sounds that can begin a word together. All right, that's what this rule means. So any combination of consonants that can begin a word belongs to the following vowel. There's a note here in parentheses. It says including MN. Now you might think to yourself and say, I don't know any words that begin with MN. What word possibly could begin with MN? But notice what it says. It says under Greek influence. So in Greek, we'll find words that begin with MN. So we'll leave that for Greek studies, but it's just saying that in Latin, these two consonants, MN, are kept together because they're used together at the beginning of Greek words. So any combination of consonants that can begin a word, including MN, belongs to the following vowel. They stay together, in other words. In other combinations, so any other combinations of consonants in a word will be divided. The first consonant will belong to the first syllable, and the second consonant will belong to the second syllable. Okay, so any combination that can begin a word, combinations that we call blends in reading class, we call them blends because they're almost like diphthongs that are consonants. If you think about what a diphthong is as a vowel or with vowels, these special combinations are like diphthongs among consonants. Okay, two sounds that are spoken together. They'll always be kept together, including when we divide syllables. But any other combinations will be divided and separated into two different syllables. So let's look at a couple examples. We have asper, which we looked at before. The consonants S and P can begin a word, so they're kept together, and the word is divided into syllables before the S-P combination. So we have a, sper. Sper is treated as one consonant sound. We have Faustus. Faustus. We have a diphthong, a-u. You need to be able to identify the diphthongs. Notice how they're kept together in one syllable. So we have two vowels, but we don't divide the syllable between these two vowels because this is a special pair. This is a diphthong. It's just one syllable, fau, fau. Then we've got two consonants, but because they're a pair of consonants that can begin a word, we keep them together and move them to the second syllable. So we have fau, stus, fau, stus. Next we have libri, libri, and we notice we've got two vowels, so we know we have two syllables. We have the vowel E here and a long E at the end, and then we've got two consonants in between those two vowels, but it's a pair of consonants that can begin a word, and so we keep them together and move them as one syllable, as one consonant, sorry. We move them as one consonant with the second syllable. And then lastly, we have omnis, omnis, and because that pair, MN, we learned about it coming from Greek influence, we keep them together, so we separate this word into two syllables because there are two vowels, a-mnis, a-mnis. So that's our rule here for dividing syllables. But notice what it says. If there are other combinations, they'll be divided. So let's look at some examples. Let's go find a few examples. See if I can find a good example for us. Here's a good example. We have the noun villa or villa, villa. We have two consonants together between the E and the A, but these are not a pair of consonants that can begin a word. So if we were to divide the word villa into two consonants, we would separate the two L's. The first syllable would be will, and the second syllable would be la, will, la. We would divide the word between those two L's. So that's a good example for us. See if we can find another one pretty easily here without going too far. An example of, here's an example. We have the word ostendo, ostendo. We have 1, 2, 3 separate vowels, so we know that there will be 3 syllables. We have 2 consonants in between 2 vowels, but these 2 consonants can begin a word, so we'll keep them together. So the first syllable will just be the vowel O. Then we've got 2 more consonants here between the E and the O. These 2 consonants do not begin a word, so we'll divide the syllables between those 2 consonants. So the first syllable will just be the vowel O. The second syllable will be sten, sten, and then the third syllable will be do, do. So we can see both examples in that word there. One where the 2 letters can begin a word, and another where the 2 letters cannot begin a word, and we divide them accordingly. Here's another example of a double L, which would be divided between the 2 L's. Here's another example of the double L, which would be divided between the 2 L's. Here's a good example of a double R. We have currere, currere, and we see the 2 R's are divided into 2 separate syllables following our rule. Here we have another example. We have 2 S's, and the word is divided between the 2 S's because 2 S's are not used to begin a word. And here's one more. We have ched si. We have ched making the first syllable and si making the second syllable because de, s do not begin any words. So lots of examples. I don't want to make that confusing at all, but I want you to see what the rules actually look like in practice, because we see these things in half of the words that we're going to read in Latin. Now, in the remark here, you may wonder, well, we read that in other combinations, the first consonant belongs to the preceding vowel. We read in other combinations, the consonants are separated. Okay, well, if you want to get into the details of that, this remark here explains exactly what's going on. It says the combinations of consonants that are incapable of beginning a word are doubled consonants. We've seen a couple examples of those being separated. And B, combinations of a liquid consonant and another consonant. This is why you have to know the liquids, because the liquids are one of the consonant kinds that will not form pairs that can begin words. So if we have a doubled consonant, or if we have 2 consonants or more that begin with a liquid, those will not be groups of consonants that can begin words, so we'll be dividing them. And we've got some examples here. The first one is almus. Almus, notice we have a liquid L and another consonant, so we divide the syllables between those 2 consonants. Here we have ambo. Ambo, we have a liquid M, and then we've got another consonant, so we'll divide the word into 2 syllables between the M and the B. Here we have anguis, anguis. The consonants N and G do not begin any words because we have a liquid followed by another consonant, so we'll divide them when we form the syllables. Notice we have the diphthong ui. The diphthong ui is, those two vowels are kept together as one syllable. So there's another example of a diphthong staying together. And lastly, we have arbor, and we have the being separated from the be as we divide the syllables. All right, so the rule up here stated generally an explanation of exactly what the combinations are that get divided. And then in remark 2 down here, we read, compounds are treated by the best grammarians as if their parts were separate words. So compound words. If we have a word that's made up of a number of, basically of a number of words, we won't follow this rule up here when we divide it into syllables. We'll actually divide the parts of the compound word. So here we have the word abigo, abigo. Now, we've got here an example of two vowels with a consonant in between them. According to the rule we learned before, that consonant will go with the second vowel. But here we see it joined to the first vowel instead. And the reason why is because this is a compound word that's composed of the preposition ab. So this is actually a Latin word. So we'll keep that together and divide the word into syllables after that preposition. And then what we would have done is we also would divide it again between the e and the ge. So we'll have three syllables, ab, e, go. Not a, b, go, but ab, e, go, because ab is a word that's a part of this compound word. Here we see another. We see the word respublica, respublica, which is where we get the English word republic from, respublica. Now we see the vowel e and the vowel u, and we see two consonants in between the vowels. These are two consonants that would or could begin a word, s and pe. So according to our rule, s and pe would be kept together and they would start the second syllable. But because this is a compound word and res is a Latin word itself, we divide the syllable between those two consonants because it's a compound word. That's what this second remark is teaching us, okay? So that's all for Article 10. We learn what syllables are, we learn how to identify syllables, and we learn how to rightly divide syllables. Now, we're going to need to practice that a bit, and maybe in either live classes, if you join me for live classes, or in some of our Latin reading lessons, we can pay attention once in a while to dividing words into syllables. But here in Article 10, you've got the rules for how to do so. Let's go on now to Article 11. So let's say we divide a word into syllables. Let's say there are 3 or more syllables. How do we refer to those different syllables? If I want to talk about one of the syllables, how do I name the different syllables? That's what we learn here in Article 11. We read that the last syllable of a word is called the ultimate syllable. Ultimate means last. The last syllable of a word is called the ultimate. In Latin, the word is ultima, and it simply means last. All right, so the last syllable of a word is called the ultimate, or the ultima syllable. The next to last, the second to last, is called the penult. That's a strange word, but you'll see what it means in just a second. The penult. So the second to last syllable is called the penult. It's called penult because we know ultima means last. Ultima means last. That's where the second part of the word comes from. But then in Latin, the word paine, or in later Latin it becomes pene. Pene means almost. So penult is really a compound word that could be read as pene ultima, which means almost the last or next to last, near to the last. Penult, pene ultima, near or almost to the ultima, to the last. And then the syllable that's one before that, so the next to last, the one before the penult is called the antepenult. The antepenult. And the Latin word ante just means before, so antepenult means before the penultima, before the penult. That's the antepenult. So we have names for the last three syllables of a word. Ultima, the last syllable, penult, the second to last syllable, and antepenult, the third to last syllable. Now, why would we ever do this? Why would we possibly name the syllables? The reason we learn these names for these last three syllables is because we're going to learn rules for how to accent Latin words. And the only way that we can make rules for how to accent Latin words is to be able to name these syllables. That's why we have these three names for the last three syllables. So let's look at a couple examples. If we take the Latin word, let's take stimulus. Stimulus, we divide it into three syllables, stimulus. Lus is the ultima syllable, mu is the penult syllable, and sti is the antepenult syllable. Let's look for another one. Here we have villicus or willicus, willicus. Cus is the ultima, or the ultimate syllable. Li is the penult syllable, and we is the antepenult syllable. For the word wigil, wigil, gil is the ultimate syllable, and we is the penult. There is no antepenult because it's only got two syllables. Okay, so we can name the syllables using these three names, and as I said, that's going to become important when we learn the rules of accent marks, because we're going to need to name the syllables in the accent rules. You'll see that later on. And then lastly, under Article 11, we see one final remark. A syllable is said to be open when it ends with a vowel and close when it ends with a consonant. A syllable is said to be open when it ends with a vowel and close when it ends with a consonant. So if we look up here at some examples, we see this first syllable in the word almus. It ends with a consonant, so that would be called a close syllable. Mus also ends with a consonant. That would be a close syllable. Here we have ends in a consonant. That would be a closed syllable. Bo ends in a vowel. That would be an open syllable. Okay, that's what that last remark means at the bottom of Article 11. And that's all for Lesson 7 here. You can see the next lesson begins in Article 12. So in Articles 10 and 11, very important stuff for grammar. We learned what syllables are. We learned how to divide a word into its syllables, especially when things get a little confusing. We learned some rules for how to do that. And we then learned how to name the different syllables of a word. We learned how to name the last three syllables of a word. And we learned the reason why this is important is because later on we're going to learn the rules for accent marks. And in order for us to learn those rules, let me just see if I can find an example to prove that I'm not making this up. Let's just see if we can find an accent mark rule here. Here we go. You'll see, for example, here's the first rule. And don't worry about understanding this because this is from a future lesson, but I just want you to see how they use the names of the syllables. Disyllabic words have the accent on the penult. So you see how we use the name of the syllable in the rule. Polysyllabic words have the accent on the penult when the penult is long, and on the antepenult when the penult is short. So That's what I was referring to when I said we need to learn these names for the syllables because we use them in the rules for accent marks. Okay? And that comes down in Article 15. We'll get there in a couple lessons. But that brings us to the end of Article 11 and to the end of Lesson 7. I hope that that's a helpful guide through your first reading of this lesson, these two articles. If there's anything in there that was not clear or you'd like explained a little better, just ask any questions you have on the course forum, and I'll do my best to get you the answers that you need. Again, I hope that's helpful. God bless your studies.